in discussions as it relates to cultural diversity and the international relations. We're talking about cultural diplomacy as a panacea for accelerated international relations. We have with us live in the studio this morning Professor Uchenna Vasser. She's a founder, Association of Advancement of Spanish Language in Nigeria. She was speaking to us on these issues and how these issues can be improved upon. Good to have you, ma'am. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Okay, so what is cultural diplomacy, or should I say cultural diplomacy, as it relates to international relations? And how can this diplomatic cultural environment be used to accelerate our development, especially on the international ground?
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. And like you said, we are here as part of a project to introduce Spanish language, which in and of itself is a cultural import into Nigeria. So the topic of today has a lot of words that I think should probably be taken one at a time.
Absolutely.
So you say cultural, you say panacea, you say diplomacy, you say acceleration. I may agree with the cultural, the panacea, the diplomacy, but I'm not sure why acceleration. What I would like to say is that if we're talking about Nigeria with regards to the rest of the world, then I say that cultural diplomacy might be a mute subject. Why do I say that? Because for centuries, Nigeria has been exporting its culture to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world has been better for it, or is better for it. And so today, what is the objective of Nigeria today with regards to culture and diplomacy? So maybe I'm throwing the question back at you, because you need to clarify what you mean by that. Are we talking about exporting culture? Are we talking about improving our cultural well-being? Are we talking about improving our image in the world? So what are we talking about here?
All right. For me, I just wanted to be sure what cultural diplomacy is.
Okay.
Because again, yes, it sounds so elite, but again, it's important to actually just break that down. What is cultural diplomacy?
Yes. So when you say cultural, so let's kind of define that. So it's the custom, it's the way of being of the people. Okay, we are Nigerians, and we have a way of being, and we have our customs, and we have our social mores. Diplomacy is understood to be a relationship with other places or with other entities, if you will. So cultural diplomacy, we have culture. We are using our culture to relate with other people. And I would say if that is the definition of cultural and diplomacy, then we're doing well. So the question then becomes, what is the challenge? Why are we having the discussion? So because we have, so let's kind of break it down. So I say in the Yoruba world, they have the Orishas, and we're not in that region, but we're in Nigeria. And you talk about things like Shango, Ogun, and all that. Those deities define the ways of the people, define the way of dealing with the rest of the world, defines their worldview. These cultural manifestations are in places like Brazil and Cuba. So the cultural diplomacy already exists with that one example. So that one example is a Nigerian import, or an import from a place that used to be called, that is today Nigeria. That import, or export I should say, because we exported it to Cuba, to Brazil. And so that has created a kind of a symbiosis between Brazil and Nigeria what is today Nigeria, and Cuba and what is today Nigeria. So that's cultural diplomacy, and that's doing that. Now, there could be other ways of continuing that process today. So are we talking about how do we continue the process of cultural diplomacy in Nigeria today?
Right.
Might that be the question?
Yes, of course. I mean, one good point that actually that I want to add, maybe you can also elaborate on, is the fact that is it truly cultural diplomacy? Because most of the time you see cultures dominate over others. Language plays a huge role in cultural diplomacy, and these days we've seen how people abandon their own language and tend to run with other people's language, thinking that other people's language or the way of doing things are a lot better than theirs, and you see them being empty in trying to express himself in their culture or try to express himself in another person's culture. So how do we create some sort of balance? Yes, we advocate for cultural balance or cultural diplomacy, but then again, we understand that some persons would have that at the back of their mind to dominate others and to make sure that their own culture supersede others.
So, because you say language, so there is culture and language, and one could probably say there's language and culture. Domination is that could also have, so when you say domination, again, any word you use as a preface, I have to kind of analyze it. So when cultures merge, encounter one another, there are several processes. There is assimilation, which might be what you're using in terms of domination. There is one of the ones that I prefer, which is transculturation. So transculturation means that if two cultures, or more than two cultures, they find each other, they collectively form something new. The original vestiges of the original cultures remain, but what you're looking at is a fusion of the old cultures. And so it is expected that when cultures encounter, that there's going to be some kind of assimilation, there's going to be some kind of there's going to be some kind of fusion. So if I understand, so a place like Nigeria, or take me for example, or take you for example, we're having an interview. We happen to be in a city called Enugu. I believe that city is predominantly an Igbo-speaking city.
Absolutely.
And so one would say, well, guys, why are you not having this interview in the Igbo language? Why are you speaking English? Well, English becomes the vehicle, but I don't think that by using it, we are negating our culture. It just happens to be that that man is in the business of communicating. Perhaps if the two of us started speaking Igbo, there might be a section of the society that may not understand. So language imposition does not necessarily. Now, the language imposition in Nigeria came with other things. It came with an imposition of a belief system. It came with an imposition of other things. And so one might argue that why we seem to suppress, or why we seem to want to forget our culture, is because of the imposition of the things that came with the language. So Christianity, and I'm not saying anything negative about Christianity, but it is a way of life that seems to be at odds with what was here. And for people to continue to live, to exist, they felt the need to imbibe what was supposedly better than what they had. So there is a problem, and that's why in the academic field we talk about the colonial burden. We talk about post-colonialism, which is supposed to have moved places like Africa to a rethinking of what happened to them. But then we're also suffering from neo-colonialism, which seems to be a different shade of the colonial, because we are also seemingly tied or bound by ways of thinking that seems to suppress our cultural manifestations. But I say that culture in Nigeria today is changing, because culture isn't static. So when you look at the young musicians who are out there in the world, they are expressing Nigerian culture, but in a different way. It is different from when I remember as a child, my father liked to listen to classical music, but he also listened to musicians, I don't remember their names, that played with indigenous instruments, you know. So we would like to think that Nigeria today is a fusion of the musicians with the traditional instruments and the Western kind of music to create something that is absolutely unique and is Nigerian, because this is where it came from. So cultural diplomacy, we don't have a problem. I think we should continue to look inward, and we're doing that. Slang Global, which is my organization, what we're doing is that, yes, we say Spanish. We know Spanish is not an African language. It is a language of the global market, but we're not bringing Spanish and throwing out what we've met here. We're using Spanish and teaching people in the Spanish-speaking world about Nigeria. We're using Spanish to show them that there's a place called Enugu. We use Spanish to go to a place like Ogbete Market and say, hey, this is the kind of market, but we know that if we said it in English, they may not understand. So we go to the market, we'll say to them, we point out things and the way of, like a lady braiding her hair, the pattern. I don't know if you know that, but during slavery, in a place like Colombia, we have a man by the name of Bencos Biojo. He was a slave, he escaped, and he wanted he was in the process of trying to free other slaves. But to show the freed slaves how to get to his establishment called Palenque de San Basilio, which is actually a UNESCO preservation right now in Colombia, the women braided hair, and the braids were routes to how to escape. So that when I go to the market and I show people women braiding, what they say to me is that the women are aware of this history of having used braided hair as a means of showing other slaves how to escape oppression and go into places, safe spaces. We have lost that. I don't know that people know that, but that's a cultural exportation that we're now using as a form of beauty, but it had a historical role once upon a time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So how do we leverage cultural diplomacy to improve international relations?
I think if it's not broken, no need to fix it. I think that we are doing that. The only conclusion that I would make is let's continue to look inward. We have a lot. And if I'm speaking about Nigeria, right? We have a lot to offer. But we also should remember that if you don't show pride in what you have, then nobody's going to be proud of it. We have a whole lot to offer, and we should be proud of being Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, and all the other groups in between. We have a lot to offer. So we don't need to accelerate anything. If we continue to look inward and relate to others based on our understanding of who we are and our recognition of what we have to offer, from food to music to everything, then we're in good shape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So do you think that the government have any role to play in this cultural diplomatic relations?
I do believe they do. There has to be some kind of a support system. When I came here, I had a meeting with a group of artists who said they had approached the government, not this current one, about creating some kind of an art village, but it went nowhere. So I'm not sure why it went nowhere, but that is the kind of conversation that I hope that the government will have, because here is a city that is full of talented artists. Since we came here, we've had a lot of conversations between Enugu and people in Panama, in Colombia, in Cuba, in Mexico, who are absolutely interested in what we do here. But what we're doing is at the individual, private basis. I would love to have the government weighed in, because there's one voice, but it's okay, there is one voice. But imagine the government saying, hey, you are trying to export something that is Nigerian to make us look better. How can we help you? That would be a great conversation to have with the government. And it's not just me. There will be others coming out if they know that the government is receptive to listening and creating. One other thing, when you come here to Enugu and you travel out, because that's happened to me, I come and I go, there is no place to buy souvenirs. There is nothing that says, I've been to Enugu, look at me. That is what you find in all the places. If you go to London, you'll probably get a replica of the Big Ben and what of all the other things that they sell there to the tourists. We don't have anything like that here. And I think it's high time we created something. So what says Enugu? What is it that says Enugu? If someone says something on your mantelpiece in the United States, what is that? I should proudly say, this is of the Igbo people. That doesn't exist. We should make it happen.
Wow. That speaks to also tourism potential of the state as well. I mean, harnessing something in that regard. But for you, what is the biggest challenge facing cultural diplomacy as it relates to international relations?
That's what I said. I don't think there's a challenge. It is not static. It is ongoing. Today, tomorrow. So there is no challenge as long as we recognize. So the question that you're posing means that there's an awareness. If there was no awareness, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So there is an awareness, and all I say is have the awareness and take it to step number 1, step number 2, step number 3, which is make it happen. Don't sit in a vacuum, have this conversation and do nothing. You've mentioned the government. I went to a New Yam festival. I remember that was last year, end of last year. Awesome celebration. We can do more because we have a whole lot more to offer. So there is no, so for the title that you guys gave me, acceleration, I would take out. I don't know that it's necessary. Okay. Cultural diplomacy, we're already doing it. We just need to do more. And cultural diplomacy can never be a one-way stream. If you get, you have a nice shirt on, so I think that's African?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So maybe tomorrow you'll put on something Western. That's okay. And perhaps someone reading the news in London or Washington could wear what you're wearing. So diplomacy is what it is. It's a give and take. We can't have one side dominating the conversation. So as long as we recognize, and there's the awareness, which is why you're having this conversation, recognize, then we're okay. I do also realize that you may be asking this question based on some of the unfortunate incidents, maybe, or what Canada saying something, don't let people come in, or the US saying something. I think those are not really important parts of culture. It's got nothing to do with culture. It's more political than culture. Because in that Canada that says no, Canada recognizes and celebrates African culture when it sees it. In that United States, there's a celebration of African culture. So perhaps what we're seeing is a political, which may be underneath all that, there's a cultural appreciation. I don't know, but it's more political than cultural.
Okay.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, do you think there's an economic benefits in cultural diplomacy, and how much of economic benefits can countries leverage on especially when it comes to their large scale?
Sure. I mean, like I said, fancy having, so I know that there's tourism, the conversation about tourism is here. We're also having the same conversation. However, one of the problems, and I digress, is the security concern. So we do have that. But nevertheless, if the government recognizes that the space that it governs will be mightily rewarded because of a focus on cultural manifestations, that brings in tons of money. Fancy if we had a yam festival, a masquerade festival, and then you have artifacts that people can buy, people can ship them to places. That is a boost to the economy, better than anything that I can think of at the moment. And we don't have to go inventing it. It's already here. So why don't we do it? If we had those festivals and people knew, I know there's something called the Carnival in Calabar. Well done, Carnival. I haven't been there in a while, but I could imagine at that period, there'll be vendors selling things, the people coming in, hotels are being taken up. We've got tons of hotels in Enugu here. So a carnival that has an international reach, that's a lot of money for the period of time that it lasts.
Right. I know of a lot of countries that use their culture to, promote tourism. Some of them not necessarily the type that have mineral resources that could sell and get monies, and they just leverage on their culture.
Absolutely.
And then make monies, and that's what they rely on.
Absolutely.
So
100%.
But in this country, you hardly ever hear any politician campaign on those premises.
Unfortunately.
And we have those resources.
Unfortunately,
So
yeah.
why do you think that they're not investing in that regard?
Well, that would be the million-dollar question. I have no idea why they're doing that. And what I find interesting is that many of our politicians have also traveled out, and they have seen and they have picked up a souvenir or two. So if you pick up a souvenir or two, I'm kind of thinking, so why? So, but again, what it goes back to is, can we look inward? You kind of alluded to that. So it's not the language. It's not the language. It's the failure to look inward and to say to yourself. And I actually think that that's a little bit interesting, because I do see manifestations of culture when I come to Nigeria. I see that, but it is not the next step, which is making money off it, seems to not be resonating. So if I am aware of my culture, and I've met lots of people since I've been here who are very much into Igbo culture, but they're not leveraging it.
Absolutely.
That's what needs to happen. I cannot answer the question why they're not doing that, but hopefully if somebody's listening to your program, they might say, hey, I could make money off this. Call a few artists, and there are loads of artists in this area. There are loads of people who are knowledgeable about culture. I've met a lot of them. Let's make it happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Uchenna Vasser.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic, revealing 30 minutes with you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Then. So we'll be speaking with Professor Uchenna.
Signature TV. News in your pocket.